A big set of patch notes came out, and I think this is the biggest set of patch notes that we have seen for Dragonflight, for sure. There's like almost no PvP tuning on the beta, so this is definitely the biggest patch we've seen. And some classes, you know, got some big nerfs, some got some small buffs. I think things have maybe shaken up a little bit, but really not that much. And definitely there's some classes that flew under the radar. So some of these I'm just going to kind of skip because I don't think they really mean much. So Demon Hunter, we'll quickly go over them. I don't think anybody knew that this was a thing, that Fodder to the Flame scaled with haste. So if you've ever fought a Demon Hunter and he's just chain procking demons, you know, little demons that spawn that heal him to full, give him a soul for more damage. Apparently the proc per minute on that scaled with haste. So that's why it was so ridiculous. I don't know about you, but I would have these open world fights versus a Demon Hunter in Metamorphosis who was just chain getting demons. I was like, what, isn't this thing supposed to have like an internal cooldown or something? Like what the hell is going on? So if Demon Hunters had high haste, they were just chain getting these demons. So that's a big nerf. I don't think it's a nerf that actually is going to make Demon Hunters even slightly unviable. I think Demon Hunters need more nerfs than that personally. But that is a nerf, and it could be semi-significant. Hunt damage got reduced by 10%. Okay, cool. It was crazy. Regrowth got a small buff, so little tiny buff for Wrestle Druid, another kind of insignificant change. This is something that nobody talks about for some reason. These are pretty nice buffs for Hunters. Steel Trap damage has been reduced. Okay, whatever. Explosive Shot damage has been increased. Barrage damage has been increased. So Explosive Shot, Barrage got buffed, and then they buffed all marks damage by 10%. That's a lot. That's a lot. Sometimes specs are made or broken based off like 5% buffs, 6% buffs. So buffing every spell by 10% is significant. And heavy ammo causes Trick Shot to ricochet to deal an additional 25% damage. So that does a little bit more damage. And then they buff survival damage. Okay? So survival and marks got some decent buffs. This is a very interesting change. So actually, all three mage specs got changes. So there was kind of the balance of power in mages right now was Arcane was by far the best. And then you had Fire and Frost beneath that were good at different things. So I'm actually going to skip this change for now, and we'll talk about it in a second because there's other mage changes. So I'm gonna go over all the mage changes and what I think that means for the specs after. We'll ignore the fire mage changes for now, although that is significant. So Exsanguinate cooldown was increased to 3 minutes from 45 seconds. That's insane. That's crazy. So Exsanguinate, its cooldown got buffed from 45 seconds to 3 minutes. It's 4 times longer. That is a massive omega nerf. My prediction was like assassination rogues were kind of flying out of the radar. And on the beta, at least, like when I fought good assassination rogues, they seem like a nightmare. I don't know if this changes enough to like kill them or anything. I'm not sure, but I think they'll probably still be good. Brewmaster, don't care. Mistweaver got some small buffs, like Vivify got buffed. Key Sweeping got buffed. Elon got buffed, and that doesn't matter for PvP, really. Maybe RBGs. Restoration Shaman, all healing got increased. All the Shamans were complaining about their healing, so, 5% healing on a Resto Shaman. Personally, I thought Shaman were going to be good already in the right composition, especially in 3v3. So getting some small buffs here definitely puts them as a contender to, be one of those competitive healers, in my opinion. Warlock Soul Leech. So, as you know, Warlocks have an incredible amount of self-healing and defense. Soul Leech got a 50% nerf. So now it only converts 3% of their damage dealt. It was 6. 6% is absurd. 3% is much more reasonable, but I think Warlocks are still too tanky. We'll see. We'll see. And when I say Warlocks are too tanky, I specifically mean Warlocks are too tanky against like casters. I think there's a lot of classes right now that have too many like a reduction in spell damage and just like passive shields, and if you don't have any kind of Mortal Strike, the healing is just totally overwhelming. And I think Warlocks are one of those. So I think Warlocks need armor, personally. And I would like to see their absorbs be brought down a little bit more. Arms, Field of Vengeance, now heals for 85% of the damage done. Was 65, don't really know what that means. And then some stuff about Prot, don't know. Now we get to the PvP changes, okay? Here are the big changes. Death Knights, Anti-Magic Shell Absorption reduced by 25%. So first of all, I think before I talk about these changes, I think it's important for me to say, I hear a lot of people talk about how these changes have killed Death Knight. Now, I want you to know that I spoke with who I consider to be one of the best Death Knights in North America, a guy who pretty much only plays on Holy Death Knight and has gotten rank 1 like every season in the last like 10 seasons or something like that, at least that I know of. And when I asked him about it, I said, hey, is the sky falling, or, is my my chat overreacting, or people overreacting? And he said to me that he thinks DKs will probably still be completely fine. I'm talking about Pet Kick. Yeah, so Pet Kick says he thinks DKs will be completely fine. And in context to these nerfs, I think it's also important to note that DKs were literally immortal. And like a good Death Knight was never a target ever. Okay? A good Death Knight was never a target in a match ever. Ever, ever, ever. Could never die. I think that's really important to note. And that's why these changes are, you know, they appear significant. So anti-magic shell absorption reduced by 25%. Will and Acropolis damage reduction reduced by 50%. I don't think DK should have Will and Acropolis at all. Like if this was just removed, I think DKs would still be fine. Will and Acropolis, completely insane. It's a tank ability. One of the problems with like the new talent trees, as much as I like the new talent trees, I think if you're a class that shares a general tree with tanks, like this is the result, right? Like abilities like this. If you guys didn't know what Will and Acropolis was, it's when you were under 35% health, you took 30% less damage. Like, so if you got low on health, you literally just had shield wall, you know, completely insane. Anti-magic barrier increased to anti-magic shell duration, and amount absorbed has been reduced by 50%. I think that's totally fine. I'm going to be honest. Anti-magic shell. DKs, this is my perception, and I'm really trying to not be biased here. DKs are actually immune to death from casters, and DKs never use their anti-magic shell defensive almost ever. Most of the DKs I fight just press it on CD offensively because it doesn't matter. You know, like they can't die anyways, so. This is a big nerf. I don't know if I necessarily agree with this nerf, the Abomination Limb. Like, although I do agree Abomination Limb was really, really silly, I also think there was ways to kind of play around it if you were a good player. And I think this is a substantial nerf to like one of their like what has become one of their core abilities. So I hope there's like some sort of offensive compensation for DKs now that this has been, you know, nerfed. Now, improved Death Strike, increase to Death Strike healing has been reduced by 50%. Improved Death Strike, increase to Death Strike's healing. And Death Strike healing increase based on recent damages reduced by 50%. So I think a lot of people, myself included, when you read this, you're like, oh, my Death Strike's just half. I don't know if that's necessarily true. I don't think it is just half, right? They just reduce the amount of healing you get if you get bursted. So like, if you get hit by an ability that takes you from 100% to 50%, you don't just instantly top off again. But I don't think Death Strike is like dead. I still think it's going to do a good amount of healing. I could be wrong about that. And I would have actually preferred, although I do think Death Strike's crazy and did need some nerfs, I would have actually preferred if this nerf wasn't as much and they nerfed spell warding instead. Because I think spell warding is one of the greatest defenders for DKs, especially against casters. So yeah, my thoughts on the Death Knight nerfs is when I talked to one of the best Death Knights in North America, he said he thinks Death Knights are still going to be completely fine and super strong. That's what he said. So I'm going to take his word for it. The only thing that scares me for DKs is I don't want them to just get trained by melee. I think that's the worst feeling if you're a Death Knight and you're just getting trained by melee. I also think it's really important to remember, and this is something that people forget, in Arena, you actually have a healer. I don't know if you guys know that, but in Arena, this is I'm being sarcastic. In Arena, you have a healer. So you don't have to only keep yourself up, right? You don't need to keep yourself top the whole game because you actually have a healer that heals you. I don't think it was reasonable that Death Knights just like were full health the whole game. But we'll see. We'll have to wait and see. Druid Restoration, Budding Leaves is now 70% effective in PvP. Don't know what that does. Life Bloom has been in a higher percentage of Druid's healing breakdown in PvP than we like, so reducing Budding Leaves. Okay, so it's like a Life Bloom nerf. Evoker's Scarlet Adaptation cap is reduced by 30%. Okay, so they nerfed the one-shot of Living Flame from healing yourself, like storing healing with Living Flame and then one-shotting, that got nerfed. I actually love the Evoker changes, by the way. Fire Breath's initial damage is reduced by 30%, so your one-shot on Fire Breath is reduced. Great change. And then they buffed Disintegrate and Pyre. So these are amazing changes because it basically is a buff to consistent damage and a nerf to one-shot. And there's another theme with Frost Mage too with that. So next up, Preservation Invoker had their mana regen nerfed by 10%. All healers have reduced mana regeneration in PvP, so that fights end at a reasonable period of time. Preservation receiving this reduction bring them closer in line with the other healers, so that mana is relevant. Great. They nerfed Preservation mana regen. I think that's totally fair. They had way higher mana regen than the other healers. Mage changes, we're going to save that for last. Mistweaver, Ancient Teachings of the Monastery, now heals 375% of the damage done. So I think that's when they do damage, they heal, right? I'm pretty sure. So it's like kind of a buff to fist weaving, which I think situationally could be really, really strong. Especially now that Mistweaver monks have like disable and spearhand strike. It is going to be a risk for them to push in, but I think when they do push in the right composition, they could really assist with some high damage, and I think that's the idea. It remains to be seen if this is going to be super good, but I could definitely see if I'm playing like Mage Lock, for example, and maybe I'm crazy. If I'm playing Mage Lock, for example, and like a TSG is running me down with their cooldowns, a lot of the time you can't really fight back, right? You just have to kind of like live and try to survive. Maybe that's a moment during like, you know, Grippy Hands and Spear of Bastion that a Mistweaver can go in and just reliably get broken out of CC by like the AoE damage like a Mage and Lock has. I really don't know. We'll have to wait and see, but I do think that this could be pretty strong in certain situations. Echoing Reprimand. We've all seen, you know, Paul Lamore's video of just one-shotting his video. He put a video out that was, you know, play this spec before it gets nerfed. He knew. So Echoing Reprimand, damage is reduced by 30%. I think rogues are still going to be super good. And then for Enhancement Shaman, they basically, with the improved Maelstrom weapon, the damage of your spells was reduced. So basically these two changes, I think, make it so your instant cast Elemental Blast and Lightning Bolts don't one-shot as hard. So it's just a nerf to the one-shot that Enhancement Shamans had with Elemental Blast. Now, last but not least, guys, we have the mage changes, okay? So, mages. Once again, just to recap, I thought mages, at this point, Arcane was just the best spec. And then below that, you had Fire and Frost that were kind of like, they had their own little niche that were like, okay, you know? But this changes things, okay? So, Fire mages, they got some overall damage buffs. They got Ignite damage buffs. They got Scorch damage buffs, 10%. Fireball damage buffs, 10%. Power Blast damage, 5%. And Flame Strike damage by 8%. Okay, so some overall solid damage buffs for Fire Mages, which is great because I think their damage was a little bit too low overall. So I'm actually happy to see it. You notice Fire Blast didn't get buffed, but pretty much everything else did. So overall damage buffs for Fire Mage, and then we go down to the other specs. Nether Precision is now 75% effective in PvP combat. Prodigious Savin is 80% effective in PvP combat. And Arcane Bombardment is now 65% effective in PvP combat. So those talents, Nether Precision, is the first one. Consuming a clear cast increases the damage of your next 2 Arcane Blast by 20%. So instead of it being 20%, it's only 15%. It's still very good, okay? The next up, we have Perdition Savin, which is, a lot of people didn't even use it. Where is it? Oh, a lot of people didn't even use this. That's really interesting. I never even spec this. Arcane charges further increase mastery effectiveness of Arcane Blast and Arcane Barrage by 20%. So what's really interesting is like almost no mages use that, but I think there's potential that maybe it could be problematic. It's basically a mastery increase, which is just a straight damage increase for Arcane Blast and Barrage. So they nerfed that, which is interesting because many mages didn't even use it. Most, I would say. Arcane Bombardment is now 65% effective. Arcane Bombardment is this talent, which Arcane Barrage deals an additional 100% damage. So Arcane Bombardment was very strong, and one of the main like executes that an Arcane Mage had. So instead of it being 60, or instead of being 100% increased damage, it's only 65. So some slight damage nerfs for Arcane. Now, a lot of the mages are saying like, well, I feel like a lot of the mages that never played Arcane are acting like the sky is falling, but the mages that did play Arcane and understand it all realize that it's not that bad. Like the changes, Arcane is still very good, okay? So Arcane is still going to be an extremely good spec, in my personal opinion. And then they buff Frost too. So Piercing Cold is now 50% effective in PvP combat. Now, Piercing Cold is a talent that gives you critical strike damage on Glacial and Frostbolt. So this talent, unfortunately, one of the really unfortunate things about this is it basically is a nerf to Frostbolt damage, which sucks because Frostbolt is already trash. Very unfortunate, but I think they wanted to just nerf the top end on like Glacial Spike crits. And if you saw, like, I actually have a video of what Glacial Spike can do with Mastery. It can hit very hard. It can hit very, very, very hard. Like, got like 240,000 Glacials and stuff like that. So this is a way to nerf like the crit one-shots of Glacial, but not nerf the ability overall, which I'm fine with. So the one-shot kind of got nerfed. Frostbolt to casualty, but this is a big buff. So Ice Lance damage is increased by 20%. Ice Lance is your #1 damage by far. Okay, Ice Lance is your #1 damage by far. So I think this is, it's a good change. It's actually going to make you want to play the tier, and I think Frost Mage's consistent damage is going to be extremely high. It's going to be the highest of the specs for sure. Frost Mage will have the highest consistent damage of all the specs, 100%, no doubt about it, I guarantee. Okay, so I think Frost. I was already planning on. Oh my god, I almost knocked my water. Whew. I was already planning on just playing Frost Mage, and I think this kind of just like solidifies the decision. I think it's going to be really strong in certain compositions. And I think this is another big thing. They changed Snowdrift. So Snowdrift was that really awkward talent where you cast it, it puts a little circle around you, and if people stay in the circle for too long, they get stunned. Really awkward to use. No one was using it, so they buffed it. They lowered the cooldown to 45 seconds, and they made it have no cast time. So I think in certain situations, mages actually will have a stun again. You just have to like, so you can use the stun kind of defensively if you're being trained by like a, a rat warrior or something. You can use Snowdrift and actually get a stun up on them if they stay in the circle for too long. So it's like kind of like zone denial. And also you can use this offensively with like, imagine playing with a druid that has Vortex. The team's stacked up behind the pillar. You drop an orb on them. You drop a blizzard on them. They're getting frostbitten. They're in a vortex. You blink on top of them and you Snowdrift. You AoE stun their whole team. It's going to be a difficult situation. Well, I wouldn't say it's difficult. It's going to be rare that you actually pull it off because I think good teams will position against it. But if you do pull it off, it could be really, really fun. So I think this actually makes the talent kind of viable. Frost Mages got their stun back. Now, how do I think all the specs line up? I think Firestocks went way up. So I think Firestocks, like if we can get the Rookie paint out right now. All right, these are the stonk values. All right, so this is Arcane in purple. This is their stonks. You have Fire Mage, their stonks went way up. They're trending upwards right now. They're like up here now. And then Frost Mage is trending upwards as well. Okay. And I actually think the specs are kind of like on an even footing now. Maybe I'm crazy, but I think for different situations, they're going to be on kind of like an even footing. So I think Frost Mage is going to be much better for like wizard comps, like Mage Lock. Frost is going to be the best. I really believe that. You have all kinds of cleave, overall really high consistent damage, super strong. Fire Mage I think is going to be the best with like Rogue Mage. I think like the traditional Rogue Mage is going to be Fire. Fire Mage is the easiest spec to play in my opinion in terms of the way it deals damage, and there's like no ramp on there's no ramp on any of the damage, right? So you just pop Combust and you get to go. And Fire Mage now with some of its talents just randomly, with like Time Anomaly and some of the other talents you have, you just randomly get Combust to do goes. So yeah, I think Fire Mage specifically in like sub RMP is probably going to be the best now. And I think Arcane is going to be like a really kind of well-rounded spec that'll probably lend itself well to play with other melee. Like maybe like you could play like Arcane Warrior, you could play Arcane Windwalker, like Arcane Assassination Rogue that isn't so like dependent on goes and just like higher overall single target damage. I think Arcane will still be really, really strong. So I'm very happy with the mage changes. I think it makes all three specs viable. So if you guys didn't like Arcane and you want to play the other specs, it's definitely a lot more viable to do that. Now, the last part about these notes that I wanted to mention is some classes did not get hit hard enough, okay? If you're a freaking Demon Hunter or you're like a Demo Lock, a Shadow Priest too, I think your time is coming because they did say at the end of this, they did say at the bottom of this, we finalized additional tuning and we will continue to keep an eye on class balance over the next week as we have adjustments planned for the week of December 13th, the beginning of Season 1. All right, additional adjustments are planned. So Shadow Priest, I think Shadow Priest is kind of flying under the radar right now. Feral Druids flying under the radar right now. You got Demon Hunters flying under the radar right now. You got frickin' Warlocks flying under the radar right now. I hope they didn't forget about you because I definitely feel like those specs need like some nerf, just a little bit. Nothing crazy, bro. Nothing crazy. But yeah. Yep, that's what I think about the notes and, what classes kind of are chilling. What classes... I don't think any class... I don't think these notes did anything bad to, like... Well, I shouldn't say anything bad. DK's obviously got some nerfs, but it remains to be seen. I'm not convinced that DKs are dead in any sense of the... Like, you can't... I don't think you go from, like, literally immortal, never a kill target, impossible to die, to just, like, you're a dead spec with these nerfs, so... But we'll wait and see. We'll wait and see. Okay?